don't like change, and it's scary, and it's just another with everything else that's going on in the family.
There are mornings that pretend to be ordinary and fail magnificently. And this morning failed in a way that could be smelled in the polish of the benches and felt in the small bones of the wrist. The courthouse's HVAC breathed a stale chill that had nothing to do with temperature, and everything to do with the air of a stage before a confession. And Meri, plain black dress, clean lines, eyes rimmed not with makeup but with a sleepless resolve, walked down the aisle as if each pace remeasured. 2 decades of being told to hush, to carry to frame her pain as piety, until the hush calcified into habit, and the habit into a narrative other people sold. And she reached the claimant's table with the careful hands of someone placing an heirloom in the right light at last, slid a fat manila envelope to Laurel Finch. And only then did the room truly see that whatever Meri had brought was heavier than grief. It was evidence. The unsexy, unsinkable kind that lives in numbers and signatures and knows how to stand up to a story. Across the aisle, Kody Brown reclined with the bonhomie of a man for whom rooms have always rearranged themselves. Mug in hand, suit to crisp, jaw loosened to that smirk he mistakes for charm and expression, not suited to courts because it presumes the outcome belongs to the most confident voice. And when Judge Harmon entered, hair in a disciplinarian's bun, glasses tilting toward severity, gavel striking once so that the wood answered wood with a crack of inevitability. The expression faltered, and in the quiet that followed, Laurel rose. She did not grandstand, did not pace, did not bait. She simply thanked the court and said that her client had been systematically removed from her own life, that what others called a spiritual marriage had become a legal machine, and the first cog of that machine would now be placed on the bench. Exhibit A, the 2012 Asset Agreement, in which Kody Brown had signed his name beside Meri's, to attest to a quarter share of the trust, 25% of tangible history in black ink hand. As the clerk walked it to the judge, there was a subtle sound in the gallery, not quite a gasp, more the shared intake of breath when a collective recognizes the beginning of the end of a certain lie. Kody's counsel objected on reflex. "We haven't seen this, your ladyship. This is personal, not civil. The marriage was spiritual, not registrable." And for a heartbeat, Meri felt that old dislocation being spoken about in rooms. Her story mediated by a man's timetable and a man's framing, but the judge simply said the words that make the floor steadier, accepted into record for consideration, and gestured for Meri. Hand to Bible, to swear. Her voice betrayed her only once, on the I do, and after that it held soft but steel cord. When she told the court she had been called rock, first, foundation. The flattering masonry words men lean on when they wish to build without paying the architect. And that for more than a decade she was asked to confuse loyalty with vanishing, duty with disposability. Until one day her name disappeared from documents that once could not be drawn without her. And when I asked if I was worth protecting, she said, eyes on the edge of the witness stand, he told me I was just bitter because no one wanted me anymore. A sentence so small and poisonous, it made people look at their own shoes. Kody moved one of those theatrical half-rises meant to object with posture, but the judge pinned him back with a palm. And Laurel kept the rhythm of a surgeon. Had Mr. Brown ever coerced financial choices? Yes, he had threatened she'd be cut from filming if she didn't cede the LLC rights. No one wants to watch The Sad Wife, and there it was. On paper, Exhibit B, a text printed and slid under glass. The court's fluorescence licking the toner into permanence. The recess that followed lasted 15 minutes by the clock and several years by the heart. Then the room filled again with a quieter kind of oxygen. And this time, Laurel called Christine, who crossed the wooden floor with the weary purpose of someone who has done with shame no neatness of narrative, no eagerness to play the better ex-wife. Just a simple, mortifying inventory of what she had seen, how jokes were weaponized as pedagogy so you can season your loneliness, how attention was rationed like wartime sugar, how Meri's requests were filed under difficult whilst others' reactions were framed as understandable. And then she took out a red notebook, Meri's journal, entrusted in the year. Meri thought she might finally leave and asked to be burned if she couldn't stand. Did not read the most scandalous line, but the most ordinary. He doesn't look at me when Robin is present. I feel erased in a home I helped create. The ordinariness of it did something to the room. It put the pious language out of joint with the domestic cruelty. And Cody's counsel tried to introduce the fog of motive. Isn't this envy? Isn't this retrospective? But Christine took the fog and folded it, said, if envy is a crime, we're all guilty. But envy didn't sell the land. Envy didn't erase names. Envy didn't reword the ledger, and sat. And then Janelle, whose voice does arithmetic even when it's speaking comfort, placed a binder before the mic and, page by cross-referenced page, replaced rumor with record, the formation of Brown Family Holdings, the 2019 member purge until only 2 remained, the silent diversion of royalties into Brown Future Media, the cessation of equal dispersals in the same quarter that house upgrades began 2 doors down, the title transfers that moved through hands like a trick, but landed always in the same safe. The graphs bloomed on the projector in cool blues and greens because graphs are calm even when they are catastrophic. And the keenest part of the exercise was not the money, it was the translation. Every line item had a human corollary. A birthday that was stingy because the pool had run low. A canceled plan disguised as God's will. A retreat Meri spoke about with a sparkle she must have practiced in the mirror so she wouldn't cry. A granite countertop where a promise used to be. When Janelle read the line about Meri's 25% being redirected for charitable purposes, no one was naive enough to be shocked by the euphemism. But there was a collective recoil that had the texture of nausea. Cody's jaw ticked, and his foot, previously the metronome of his certainty, began to flutter. The judge, physician-like, thanked the witness, admitted the exhibits, and set the morrow, a forensic accountant, to remove story from numbers entirely. To do to the ledger what an autopsy does to a body, refuse conjecture. And the press, smelling the iron of new blood, reloaded their questions. But Meri did not stop for microphones on the way out, because she has learned that words evaporate at the threshold and only documents travel. She went home with the envelope under her arm like an instrument, put it on the table, and stood over it with that peculiar fatigue that follows after one is told the truth in public, a fatigue that is not mere tiredness, but the swing of an inner ballast trying to find where to settle now that the weight has shifted in. It should have ended there for the night. With tea gone cold and the telemuttering some harmless nonsense about weather, but justice never visits alone. It brings in its wake the smaller ghosts. And so when Meri opened an old box of administrative detritus, looking for nothing in particular, a folded sheet slid free Cody's hand. Unmistakable. That boyish. Slightly leaning script dated March 2020, unsent, unsentenced. A letter to a wife he no longer had the courage to address with his mouth. I see you like a ghost and feel guilty, but not enough to change. I love you out of duty now. You deserve truth, but I don't know how to speak without breaking what we've built. And she read it not because she needed pain, but because records are also letters and letters are also records. And the words were both plea and prosecution. The next day, the court was a clinic, fluorescence, whiter, shoes quieter. Coughs arrested before they were born. They, the forensic accountant, Ms. Holt, placed columns where declarations used to stand. Quarterly royalties at pound XX. XXX, dispersals ceasing in 2019 Q3. Rooting through holding companies registered to Cody and Robin exclusively. House upgrades pegged to months where Meri's share should have landed. And tax strategy so cleverly threadbare it became insulting. Declare low here, decorate high there. And when the judge asked, with that deceptively gentle cadence, whether this rose to fraud under the agreements lodged as Exhibit A, Ms. Holt used the only adverb accountants really believe in clearly and said yes. Somewhere in the back row, someone exhaled a sob like a cough and was embarrassed by it. Cody's counsel tried a procedural objection and it wilted on contact with the spreadsheet. There were more exhibits after that, and more than once, Meri had the dislocating experience of feeling sorry for the man. who had orchestrated the dislocation not because he deserved pity, but because he had become smaller than his acts. And it is dreadful to watch a human shrink before your eyes, even when you have waited for that shrinkage. When court adjourned, the sky over Flagstaff had the washed-out blue of an old bedsheet, and Meri walked under it with a paper-induced hangover and a steadier spine. And Christine put a hand to her shoulder again in that way that communicates without language. And Janelle, stoical, asked only what time to meet tomorrow, and they parted. What Meri could not have known what no one expects, because one cannot schedule the arrival of a previously silent child, is that the next day would introduce a witness without a subpoena. And that witness would pierce the two defenses that men use when caught: administrative muddle and moral melancholy. Because children remember the shoes you wore when you lied, and the soup you ate while you lied, and the sound of the car when you went to lie somewhere else. And before that, something else would break open. A letter unsent has a twin. A letter unwritten, and Meri wrote hers that night. Not for the court, but for the woman who'd been taught to metabolize neglect into endurance. She began with a sentence she wished someone had said to her in the early years: "You are not difficult. You are unaccommodated, Dan," she wrote, until the kettle clicked itself off and she hadn't noticed. Morning returned like an old bill. The court filled, the gavel fell. And because truth likes witnesses the way flames like oxygen, Christine's red notebook existed. Now, not as an anecdote, but as evidence. And Ms. Holt's columns existed not as accusations, but as anatomy. And the judge's posture had moved that fractional degree from curiosity to conviction that those who watch for a living can recognize. And Cody, who used to glide center stage in any room with the smoothness of a weatherman, began to lose his consonants in the way he swallowed and the rhythm in the way he blinked. He asked to speak and was told he would in time. And when he finally did, he tried on the prose that beautiful men deploy when their accounts do not reconcile. People change. We fell out of love. You cannot arrest transformation, and for a second, it almost worked because voices are instruments and he knows how to play his. But then Laurel asked her first question, which was not poetry, but a plumb line. What did you take? And there is no metaphor robust enough to obscure the answer to that. Somewhere in the mid-morning, Leon arrived, black clothing. Serenity that looks like rage only to those who fear command asked to be heard, and the judge, who understands that court is where memory is blessed into record, permitted it. And Leon said the thing that cannot be litigated away. I have been hurt since I was 12. I know cruelty. You took her piece, and the room had to make space for that sentence because it contained a house. And when the break came and the hall exploded into microphones, Meri did not campaign. She drank water and stared at the wall and thought, with the terrible clarity that follows both loss and vindication, that she had been waiting all her adult life for someone to confirm what she had written down in a red notebook. And now that it had been confirmed, she did not feel triumphant so much as accurately tall. And yet, the day was not done. Robin was called and unfolded slowly. A choreography of expensive composure, cracking into small, unpracticed truths. And when the transfer slip for £28,000 in renovations sat on the overhead with her counter signature below Cody's, the air between the two of them altered, became less a marriage and more a corridor. And Laurel asked the question that divides the complicit from the frightened. Did you ask Meri? And the answer was the one that reveals who we have been. No. I trusted him because trust is sometimes a refined word for convenience. And the judge told Cody to sit when he rose like a reflex. And Robin cried not the pretty tears of television, but the ugly. Gulping one's truth triggers, and Meri, who has never enjoyed another woman's unraveling, stood and asked the small, devastating question, did you ever hold on to me? And the court let it hang because the court, even when it is adversarial, is sometimes a chapel. The afternoon cooled into arithmetic again. Ms. Holt returned, and the numbers drew a noose that had the exact circumference of Cody's choices. And somebody somewhere spoke of charitable purposes again, and Meri almost laughed the small, bitter laugh of a woman who has just seen the price of a gate expressed as a virtuond when the judge finally said she found the testimony credible and would review in chambers before issuing interim orders. The hammer fell not with drama, but with the dull, satisfying thud of furniture set down firmly at last. Outside, the desert was pretending to be merciful. Sun gold on the pavement as if this were simply a day among days. And Meri walked through it feeling that private vertigo people report after earthquakes. When your eyes know the buildings are upright, but your inner ear remembers the sway. Home, kettle, silence, the envelope on the table like a relic again. And her phone pinged on unknown number. The oldest narrative device in the world, and she almost didn't answer and then did. And across that thin wire came the future in a woman's voice, not reconciliation. Not romance, not God, but a producer offering Meri her own story with editorial control, which is the secular phrasing for agency. She ended the call without agreeing because one cannot build a second story before the first has been cleaned to its joists. But she smiled despite herself at the title that arrived all on its own. The way names sometimes do on Earth, because that is what documents do when they are read aloud. And that is what women do when they stop being polite and keep being exact. Later, alone, in the tremulous hour before sleep, she opened the drawer where she keeps old church programs and school certificates, and of course letters, and found the unsent one in Cody's hand and placed beside it the one she had just written, and looked at the pair of them as if they were a before and after photograph of a face, and she didn't cry. She went to bed, and in the morning the court would be a machine again. And the machine would do what machines do when those who serve them are honest, take in fuel and produce outcome. And the outcome would be written down in sentences that can be appealed but not shrugged off. And sometime after that, someone would slide an email into her inbox that would turn a civil reckoning into a federal one. And sometime after that, a country that loves a good fall would watch a man finally meet gravity. But for now, there was only the simplest form of triumph. A woman who had been told she was nothing had made the room agree she was something, and the room had written it down. Then what followed was the slow, deliberate pressing of salt into the tissue, not to torture, but to cauterize. Because courts, unlike television shows, do not climax once and end. They accumulate. They stack the unbearable until someone breaks. And as dawn cracked pale over Flagstaff on the second day of Meri Brown's reckoning, it was not whether that carried people to the courthouse, but curiosity sharpened into hunger. The kind of hunger that made journalists rise 2 hours early to polish their questions. That made locals queue not for spectacle, but for the eerie satisfaction of watching something long whispered finally be read aloud. And that made Meri herself put on the same plain black she had worn yesterday, because repetition has a dignity of its own. Like mourning each morning until it becomes a habit of self-respect. When she walked in the foyer, was already bristling with murmurs. And when Judge Harmon banged the gavel at 9 sharp, the quietness that followed was more oppressive than any shout. For silence is a courtroom's weapon, and today it was wielded like a blade. Laurel Finch did not waste a second. She called her expert Miss Reagan Holt, forensic accountant, gray suit. Spectacles with the chill of arithmetic behind them. The kind of woman who has spent a lifetime saying, "I'm afraid the numbers don't agree," and Holt wasted even less. Projecting spreadsheets onto the screen in pale greens and grays. Each column a calm indictment, each row a witness without bias. And she explained that from 2019 onwards, the equal dispersals of royalties ceased. That Brown Future Media was formed with only Cody and Robin as members. That for properties sold since 2020 had all been liquidated without Meri's share appearing anywhere in the ledger. And that more than £60,000 had been spent on home improvements and spa treatments in the period where Meri was pawning jewelry for groceries. And the air in the room shifted again, not gasping this time, but sagging. Like the weight of facts is heavier than the weight of drama. And the judge's pen made its slow, precise crawl across the docket. While Cody sat too still, the kind of stillness that is less composure and more panic embalmed. Laurel pressed further, and Holt admitted calmly, "Yes. In my professional assessment, this pattern constitutes deliberate redirection of funds and breach of fiduciary responsibility." And the word deliberate seemed to drop like a pebble into a pond and spread concentric circles of finality. Because negligence could be excused, misunderstanding spun. But deliberate is the one adjective that makes fraud taste metallic in the mouth. Cody's counsel tried to object, argued semantics, but it fizzled against Holt's color-coded tables. And by the time she closed her binder, the gallery no longer whispered, because the whispering class knew instinctively when the temperature had changed from anecdote to arithmetic, and arithmetic has no conscience. Yet, what even Holt's numbers could not capture was the moment that came unbidden. The door creaked open. The gallery craned, and Leon Brown, Meri's child, Cody's biological, silent until now, walked forward in black. Serenity cut with something fiercer. And when they asked permission to speak, the judge, who had been practicing severity for 40 years, softened infinitesimally. Because sometimes you know when testimony is history and when it is inheritance. And Leon swore and then said what no accountant could. I was 12 when he laughed at dinner with Robin while Mum sat invisible. I saw her pray in the dark for calls that never came. I saw her question her worth daily. And the hush that followed was thicker than any gasp, because no cross-examination can dismantle a child's memory. It sits in the marrow, uneditable, and Cody, who had been smirking yesterday, snapped forward, said, "Stop. This isn't your fight." And Leon, voice breaking once and then steadying like steel poured into a mold, answered, "It was never my fight, Dad, but it was always my hurt." And for the first time in years, Meri felt both her knees weaken and her spine strengthen simultaneously, because that was the paradox of validation net shattered and steadied in the same breath. The court recessed after that, but there is no recess from truth. So when they reconvened and Laurel called her next witness, the room was already buzzing with the aftershock. And this time it was Robin who rose, face painted into composure, hands trembling just enough to betray the choreography. And she swore the oath with the voice of someone who knows she cannot escape without consequence. And Laurel's questions landed like hammer taps on a vase already cracked. Did you know your name was on the filings that erased Meri's? Yes. Did you countersign for transfers that remodeled your home with funds partly hers? Yes. Did you ever confirm Meri knew? And each no was a crack until finally Laurel's voice lowered so it almost trembled, asked, "Did you ever hold on to her?" And Meri rose without instruction, face shaking, eyes brimming but not broken, and asked directly across the aisle, "Did you ever once ask me if I was all right? Or did you watch me disappear and keep your mouth shut?" And the question hung in the court longer than any gavel strike, because it was not about money. It was about complicity. And complicity makes cowards out of the best intentioned. Robin crumbled, then confessed she had trusted Cody. Confessed she had signed because he told her Meri was unstable. And the gallery shifted again, because it is one thing to betray by malice and another to betray by convenience, and the latter corrodes just as much. The judge ordered a recess. The bailiff barked, the cameras flashed, but no one could shake the feeling that the room had transformed into something more than legal. It had become ecclesiastical, a place where sins were cataloged, and Meri, standing in the corridor with Christine and Janelle at her shoulders, realized that yesterday she had been a plaintiff. Today she was something stranger mirror in which everyone saw their complicity, and that mirror was shattering piece by piece. The day rolled on, Holt returned, exhibits stacked higher. And by the time the sun slanted into the chamber, Cody's jaw was clenched so hard it looked wired shut. His counsel's notes grew frantic. Robin sat pale as milk. Christine stared at the ceiling as if waiting for divine thunder. And Janelle tapped her fingers in the rhythm of calculation. And the judge adjourned with the quiet promise of closing testimonies tomorrow. But the gallery left as if leaving a theater after an unfinished play, knowing the last act would either redeem or damn. Outside the courthouse, Meri stood again before microphones. But she did not give them the quote they wanted. She simply said, "You can't erase a woman with paper," and turned away. And it trended because it was the kind of sentence the internet loves: pithy, tragic, true. And yet inside her kitchen later that night, Meri did not feel like a trend. She felt like a survivor rearranging receipts on a table. And then her phone pinged an anonymous email. Subject line, "You don't know the full truth about Cody." 3 attachments, asset maps, side files. Override requests Anne as she clicked through charts that linked his name to offshore accounts and even Leon's. Her stomach turned to stone because this was not merely civil betrayal. It was criminal design, federal bait, and she sat back, hand to mouth, whispering, "He even used you." When Leon entered hoodie up and she showed them, and their eyes widened, not in shock, but in confirmation, because children often already know. By morning, the federal agents would call. By evening, the headlines would sharpen. But for now, in that dim kitchen, Meri understood that part I had been her introduction. Part 2 was her dissection. And part 3, the one galloping towards her like a horse she could hear before she could see, would be her flagration. Because courts punish theft with restitution. But governments punish laundering with prison, and Cody Brown, who had once thought himself the architect of polygamy as brand, had built a cathedral of receipts with a steeple sharp enough to pierce him through. And all Meri had to do now was keep walking one plain black dress at a time, into the furnace of truth that would no longer ask her to prove she existed, but would demand him to prove he hadn't lied. And he couldn't. Not anymore. Not with letters, not with ledgers. Not with Leon standing like an unsilenced incarnate. And so, as the second day closed, the city trembled in anticipation of the third. Because everyone knew the storm had only just begun. By the third morning, the trial no longer felt like litigation, but like a vigil. A gathering of people waiting for something to be buried. And when Judge Harmon returned to the bench with her glasses lower on her nose and her voice steady as stone, the silence in the gallery was more reverent than hostile. She recited the evidence agreements, journals, transfers, testimonies. The letter Cody had written, but never sent. The one Meri had written, but never dared post-stand, she said, with the calmness of a surgeon delivering truth that Mr. Brown had breached trust, misappropriated funds, and violated the dignity of the very woman he once called his foundation, and ordered restitution, restructuring, and public record of his wrongdoing. Cody slumped as though air had left him. Robin sat pale as parchment, and Meri, who had walked into this place draped in silence, now walked out with her voice, not raised in triumph, but spoken in steady clarity. I stayed too long. I gave too much. But today I took something back myself. And when she stepped into the sunlight, Christine and Janelle flanking her, Leon holding her hand. The cameras caught not a plaintiff, but a woman reborn. The sort of woman who cannot be erased again because she has learned to write her own name into history. And as the crowd erupted and the reporters clamored, she did not answer because she no longer owed anyone a line. Her silence now was not submission, but sovereignty. And in that silence, the story closed. In that silence, the story closed.